The word blockade carries the weight of history. From ancient naval sieges to modern maritime patrols, blockades have always been tools of pressure, signaling both strength and resolve. And now, headlines echo with claims that NATO and the United States are moving to encircle and isolate Russia, closing down its access routes and tightening military pressure on multiple fronts. Some call it deterrence, others call it escalation. But one thing is clear, the geopolitical chessboard has entered a tense and uncertain chapter. So what does this so-called blockade actually mean? How is it being carried out, and why do some analysts say it could become President Vladimir Putin's biggest mistake? Over the next 8 minutes, we'll unpack the history, the strategy, and the real-world consequences of NATO's moves to constrain Russia's military and economic reach. Traditionally, a blockade meant fleets of ships surrounding enemy ports, preventing trade or reinforcements. But in the 21st century, blockades are multidimensional. They don't just happen at sea. They happen in cyberspace, in airspace restrictions, and in choke points along critical land corridors. When NATO leaders speak of restricting Russia, they refer to a combination of air patrols and airspace closures over Europe and the North Atlantic, naval deployments in the Baltic and Black Seas to monitor and intercept Russian movements, sanctions and financial restrictions that choke Russia's economic lifelines, logistical blockages, limiting Russia's access to advanced technology, fuel, and military equipment. In other words, the blockade is not one dramatic action, but a layered strategy designed to cut Russia off from its key avenues of power projection. How did we get here? The roots of this blockade trace back decades. NATO expansion eastward after the Cold War already positioned the alliance closer to Russia's borders. The 2008 war in Georgia, the 2014 annexation of Crimea, and finally the 2022 full-scale invasion of Ukraine, all hardened NATO's resolve. Each crisis prompted new waves of sanctions, deployments, and military exercises. By 2024, NATO had shifted from deterrence by reinforcement to deterrence by forward defense. That means instead of waiting to respond, NATO places forces directly at the front line. Poland, the Baltic states, and even the Black Sea region. This forward posture makes Russia feel surrounded, and in many ways it is. Russia's geography makes blockades particularly effective. The country depends on limited maritime choke points. The Baltic Sea via Kaliningrad and St. Petersburg, and the Black Sea through Crimea and the Bosporus Strait. Both are narrow, heavily monitored, and easy to restrict. NATO navies regularly conduct patrols in these waters, and while they don't formally close them, the effect is the same. Russian vessels face constant surveillance, restricted movement, and the knowledge that any aggressive action would be met with overwhelming force. Meanwhile, sanctions effectively block Russia's access to many Western ports. Oil shipments, critical components, and trade routes have been rerouted or cut off entirely. The blockade isn't a single fleet of ships it's a web of restrictions stretching across seas and continents. Blockade in modern times also extends to the skies. NATO has closed much of European airspace to Russian aircraft. This means Russian airlines are forced to take long detours, burning extra fuel, losing passengers, and draining money. Military flights face even greater scrutiny, with NATO jets frequently intercepting and shadowing Russian planes near alliance borders. Then there's cyberspace. Since 2022, Western nations have systematically cut Russia off from software, semiconductors, and digital finance systems. In some ways, this digital blockade has been more devastating than the physical one, because it strikes at Russia's ability to innovate and maintain its high-tech industries. So why do some call this Putin's big mistake? Because his assumption was that the West would fracture. He believed NATO members divided by politics and energy needs would not act in unity. Instead, the invasion of Ukraine triggered the opposite: unprecedented cohesion. With countries like Finland and Sweden even joining NATO. By pushing too hard, Putin invited a coordinated response that now feels like an encirclement. Instead of intimidating Europe, Russia's actions galvanized it. Instead of weakening NATO, it strengthened it. This is why analysts argue the blockade is, in part, the direct result of Russia's miscalculation. Of course, Russia is not passive. Moscow frames NATO's actions as aggression, arguing it is the West that has militarized the region. Russia has increased military patrols in the Arctic, expanded bases in Kaliningrad, and deepened ties with China, Iran, and North Korea to bypass Western sanctions. But even with these moves, Russia struggles. Its economy is heavily dependent on resource exports. Without access to advanced technology and financial systems, its military modernization has slowed. In many ways, Russia is being forced into a position of isolation that limits its long-term strength. Blockades are not without danger. History shows they often provoke counterattacks. NATO must walk a fine line, applying enough pressure to deter Russia, but not so much that it sparks reckless retaliation. Balance is delicate. Economic strangulation can lead to desperation, and desperation can be unpredictable. This is why NATO frames its moves carefully. Officially, there is no total blockade. Instead, it's called deterrence, sanctions, exercises. But to Moscow, the effect is indistinguishable from a blockade, and that perception matters. The NATO blockade has ripple effects far beyond Europe. Energy markets are reshaping, with Russia selling more oil to Asia and less to Europe. Supply chains are rerouting. Countries in the global south must navigate a world where great power rivalry constrains trade. Meanwhile, other states watch closely. China studies the sanctions on Russia as a preview of what it might face in a Taiwan crisis. Smaller nations learn lessons about dependence on Western systems. In many ways, the blockade is not just about Russia. It is about setting norms for global power struggles in the 21st century. So where does this end? NATO leaders insist the measures are defensive, aimed at preventing Russia from further expansion. Russia insists it is being cornered. The standoff continues. What is certain is that the longer this blockade, formal or informal, continues, the more the world adapts to it. Trade flows shift, alliances harden, and a new Cold War-style divide begins to look permanent. When history books are written, they may well describe this moment as the era of encirclement, when one great power scramble backfired, leading to isolation and counterpressure. Whether this blockade prevents wider war or becomes the spark of one will depend on choices yet to be made. For now, every patrol in the Baltic, every intercepted aircraft, every sanction passed is part of the same story. A slow, grinding strategy of pressure, and behind it lies a sobering lesson in geopolitics. Sometimes the greatest mistake is underestimating the unity of your rivals.